Got it. Okay. Now I have the pleasure of introducing Josh Bernoff. Josh is co-author of the best-selling book Groundswell, and I want to get that second part of this right, a comprehensive analysis of corporate strategy for dealing with social technologies. We have read it. I know Frank's team is reading it and boning up on it because Josh is about to meet them and hang out with them a little bit after he talks today. Josh used to cover Comcast as an analyst when he was at Forrester covering our sector. And now Josh has a very, very cool title. It seems like if you're in social media, you get a cool title. He is Vice President of Idea Development at Forrester. So we're thrilled to have Josh. Josh, one more note, the Society for New Communications Research picked Josh and his co-author Charlene Lee as Visionaries of the Year. So welcome, Josh, and hear what is so visionary about Groundswell.
Okay. Thanks so much. I got this. Okay, thanks. Hi, it's great to be here. I love talking to nonprofits because I can actually give some back here, but that's not the only reason I accepted this invitation. The other one is that I grew up in Philadelphia. I was here for the first 20 years of my life, and then for the next 30 years I was in Boston, where I went to school and where I built my career. So just to give you some perspective, this means that my idea of heaven would be watching the Red Sox beat the Phillies in the World Series. But that would mean you'd be in the World Series, so that wouldn't be so bad. I have been all around the country and all around the world talking about the concepts in the book, which really do seem to have resonated. And the reason is that the time to play with this stuff is gone, and it's actually time now to get useful work done using social technologies. This is the fifth time, actually, that I've talked to a group of nonprofits, and we've thought a little bit about the unique qualities that nonprofits need to address here. This is not switching. Oh, it's this one? Press it hard, he said. This is how I fix things at home. If it doesn't work, hit it harder. Is there an on switch or something? While he works on that, hey, can I advance them right from here? Okay. Okay, it actually goes in the right direction. Okay. Yes, I said now is the time to actually get useful work done using social technologies. And when I talk to nonprofits in particular, what I see is two things. First of all, an enormous amount of energy around this. People are very interested in accomplishing goals for nonprofits using social technologies. And also a lot of sort of confusion. A lot of running around, a lot of people talking about Facebook or Twitter, but not necessarily toward a particular direction that they want to go. And that's really what I hope you take away from today's talk, is a plan for how you can actually accomplish the goals for your nonprofit using these technologies. In a recession as we are now, is a very interesting time to talk about this because money's tight, and especially the money that you might use for marketing or awareness is starting to get scrutinized a lot. And we all know that traditional media, like advertising, can be very effective at getting people to be aware of your organization. And down at the end, you can use things like direct marketing to push them over the edge to actually become involved with you or contribute to you. It's in the middle here where consideration and preference are that you have sort of the black hole. And it's in this environment where people are talking to each other that social technology is most powerful and most important. Let me move on to this. I said that I was going to help you with actually accomplishing things here. The thing to think most about is that successful social applications start with a clear objective. So don't come to me and tell me that you have a Twitter strategy. That's very interesting. Come to me and tell me that through Twitter you expect to be able to reach 5 times as many people with the message of your organization. Don't tell me that you want to start a community. tell me that as a result of starting a community, you expect to be able to provide support for the people that you're attempting to help and get them to be able to accomplish their own goals. By starting with an objective, you become successful. Now, this is something that I think people you would expect to understand in business, because when a business invests in technology, they have a reason for it. Nobody says, hey, we got a new accounting system. Oh, really? Why did you put in place a new accounting system? Because it was cool. And yet, when it comes to social technologies, it's often just like that. You know, oh, we put a presence on MySpace. Why did you do that? Because it was cool. What I'm suggesting is, if you think about this in terms of your goals, you're much more likely to succeed. So I'm going to talk about three things. First of all, what do I actually mean by the groundswell? Second, how can you as an organization participate? And third, what can you accomplish there? So let's start with what do we mean by the groundswell. Well, this is the way people usually think about these applications, right? Social networks, blogs, Twitter, forums. The challenge with this is that I have to update this slide once a week. Because this technology moves forward at such a rapid pace that if you attempt to keep track of the individual elements of it, you know, this week it's Twitter, next week it's no, Twitter's passé, now it's friend feed, you will go crazy. Instead, you want to concentrate on the underlying social trend, and then you can actually see which of these particular elements is useful to you. Now, by the social trend, this is what we call groundswell, a social trend in which people use technologies to get the things they need from each other rather than from traditional institutions like corporations and nonprofit organizations. This means that people are connecting with each other, they're drawing strength from each other online, and when you think of it as a social trend, you recognize that all that technology is just a way to enable this, and that in fact it's something that existed before technology, right? I'm sure cavemen were talking to each other in an attempt to draw strength from each other and support each other, but that when you look at the technologies, they are just making it possible to do that in a new and more powerful way, whether you're connecting up with other people locally or whether you're actually trying to make friends with someone with similar views in Singapore or Sao Paulo. So I'm going to show you an example of how powerful this is. Now, this slot in the presentation is sometimes occupied by the famous Comcast sleeping technician, but in honor of Comcast today, I'm going to show you something a little different. So this is a video that was actually put up on the internet by Motrin, the pain relief company. Has anybody seen this with Motrin Moms? You aware of it? Right, a few people. So Motrin had these sort of funny little videos about why you should take Motrin, and this particular one was about women who wear babies in a sling. And the fact is that, according to this, that they're obviously wearing them because it's the fashionable thing to do. But if you do that, you're going to get aches and pains in your neck and your back, and you should take a Motrin. So they put this up on the Motrin website, and that was on a Friday. And then the people at McNeil Consumer Healthcare that make Motrin went home for the weekend. Right around the time that they went home, people started talking about this, because if you know any of the people, women who wear their new babies in a sling, they don't do it to be fashionable in general. They do it because they feel that it gives them a sort of bond with their babies, and they became sort of upset with this. So the first thing that happened was they started Twittering. And if you look at this, this is a graph of the number of tweets that talk about Motrin Moms, which was the tag that developed for this. Most of them complaining about how insensitive Motrin was. And you can see on a Friday, it went up to a peak, then it slowed down a little because they went to sleep. Then they woke up on Saturday morning and started tweeting some more. So this was the first sign that things were going wrong. Now, because they didn't have Frank Eliason working for their company, they didn't know what to do about this. So now it's a Saturday, and what happens next? Well, things happen very fast in this space. So the second thing that happened was that some concerned moms made a little YouTube video as sort of a rebuttal to this. And of course, it's not all serious. We also got this. It's a little satirical video. And then finally, as we start going into Saturday and Sunday, the people at McNeil Consumer Healthcare realize that something bad is happening, and they put this up on their website. Oh my gosh, we made a mistake. We heard you. We're really sorry. It's a sincere policy. We understand about the concerns. We're in the process of removing this ad from all media. Of course, they had put it up in some places like bus shelters and billboards, which take a while, but they said, okay, we understand the problem and we're sorry. Now, the interesting thing about this response is that it stayed up on the Johnson & Johnson, the Motrin website for months, which means that you'd come to the website never having heard of this and say, oh, they're apologizing, they must have done something wrong, obviously undoing any sort of benefit that they might have gotten from the original advertisement. But eventually this subsided and they took it away. So does this only live on in my presentation? Well, the thing about social media is it persists partly through its placement in search engines. So this is actually a recent search here on Google for Motrin, and you can see at the top here you've got Motrin.com, then we have a couple of websites about drugs. Here are the two videos I showed you right below that. And then what's down here at the bottom, so this is like the 7th search result on the first page, is the New York Times blog talking about this Motrin Moms episode. And that is there for good. That's going to be there for a long time until Motrin's in the news about something else. And even in these eras of newspapers losing potency, the New York Times still carries a certain amount of credibility. So it's not just a bunch of nuts with Twitter. It's not just people who feel like making a YouTube video. You're here now telling people about this in the long term. This is why people are scared about social technology, is because it goes in directions you cannot predict. But the only defense you have is to actually participate, and as long as you're participating, you may as well use it to accomplish your own goals. And oh, by the way, when you're doing that, you're actually in a position to respond if something like this happens. So how can you participate? Well, let me sort of give you a framework for thinking about this. You start, this is your organization. I know some of your offices don't look as nice as the Comcast building, which I've put up there, but inside your company, you're thinking, inside your organization, you're thinking about the goals that you have, the messages that you want to get out. You send them out, and they go out to your various stakeholders. And those stakeholders consume what you have to tell them, they consume your services, and then they benefit, or at least that's the way we always thought things were. But in the new world, these people are communicating with each other. They are deciding on their own about the issues that are important to you and about what they think about your organization. And you can't stop that any more than Motrin can get those search results off of the Google page. The only choice you have is to actually participate in this, to understand it, and to take that power that comes from all these social connections and actually turn it to your advantage. Now, in order to do this, we recommend a 4-step process, which we call POST. And I know it's shocking for an author and an analyst to come up here and talk to you about a 4-step process, but I will do it anyway because it's a good way to remember the right order to do these things in. You start with people. Assess your customers or stakeholders' social activity. So I'm going to pick on somebody here. I like you because your shirts, Sarah's, matches my book. So what organization are you from?
Eagles Youth Partnership, the charitable wing of the Philadelphia Eagles.
The Philadelphia, oh, okay. So the people who you're trying to reach out to, do they use social technologies?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Eagles fans, 5 million in the region.
5 million Eagles fans, and they're all using them? Some of them are using them? Okay. Well, you sounds like you've got a pretty good bead on what's going on out there. You could do searches, find out what sort of communities they're participating in. This is really the first step. I mean, I have had people come to me and say, our customers are 65-year-old men typically. Should we be using social technologies? And the answer is probably not, because they're not participating that much. You'd be much better off spending your money on something else. On the other hand, if you're trying to reach college students and you're not doing this, you're way behind. So the first step is to understand your customers' social activities, and I'll show you some details on people that may be of interest to nonprofits in just a second. Second is objectives. Decide what you want to accomplish. As I said, clear objectives are the key to a successful social strategy. So once you know who you're trying to reach out to, then you try and figure out what are you trying to accomplish. And depending on that, you will change your strategy. Now, the strategy is the third piece. That's plan for how the relationships will change. But these relationships that you're changing are long-term. So if you're going to build a community, for example, whether it's a community of donors or a community for the people you're trying to help, that community and your organization will have a long-term relationship, and these things tend to grow over time. So this is not like a marketing campaign that you do for 6 months and then you're done. In fact, you're investing in a long-term asset. And you want to think about it that way. The last thing to look at is technology. Once you've decided on the people, objectives, and strategy, then you can figure out, is the right strategy to build your own community, is the right strategy to use a blog. You fit the technology choices to what you do with people, objectives, and strategy. So let me show you how this works in action, and I'm going to start by looking at people. Now, we at Forrester collect an awful lot of data, and we needed to organize the use of social technologies because there are dozens of different ways that people use them. So here's how we organized it. We look at people in different groups. So for example, at the top are the creators. These are people who at least once a month publish a blog, publish web pages, upload video or audio, write articles or stories. They're the ones who are actually creating the content that makes the rest of this whole thing go round, like the people who created the satirical YouTube videos, for example. How many of you in this room are creators? That is a very high number. But you see, it's not everybody. It looked like about a third. The people who are online is probably even higher. But some people are comfortable doing this, other people are not. And it really is just, you just want to look at this as one element of the sort of social ecosystem. The next step down are the critics. These are the people who react to content other people create. They participate in discussion forums, which even now that we've had them for about 30 years are still a very active part of what's going on in the social world. They post comments on other people's blogs. We've also got the collectors who organize content using things like RSS feeds and tagging. The joiners, a group that, by the way, has been growing the most lately. This is the people who are in social networks. The spectators, very important group. These are the people who are watching or reading the content that's created by others. And you can't see them, but if you look at something like those YouTube videos I showed you, they might have 200,000 views. That's 200,000 people who are looking at that. Most of them are going to be spectators. Finally, you've got the inactives, or people who don't do any of these things. When we look at the level of participation, and by the way, these numbers do add up to more than 100%. That's because they overlap. It's not because I made a mistake. Anyway, these are the numbers in North America from January 2008. And by the way, as I said, we've seen the 2009 numbers are about to come out from Forrester, and they are higher. But if you look here, about half of the people are spectators. We got 14% creators. We got 22% joiners. This tells you sort of the profile of what's going on with social technologies online. By the way, I'll mention here once our website at groundswell.forrester.com. It's got a whole bunch of data like this. You can look at it by age and gender, by different countries. There's also there the winners of last year's Forrester Groundswell Awards, which include a nonprofit category, and you'll be able to look at this year's awards if you would like to tell us about how great your application is. You have about a month to get the nomination in, and you might win for the best nonprofit use of social technology. Okay, enough of the plug. The question here is not what these numbers are, but what are these numbers for you, the people you're trying to reach. So for example, here it is classified by age. The vertical lines indicate the average across all online adults. And you can see age is the most important variable in predicting use of social technologies. The 25 to 34s have got 21% creators and 58% spectators, whereas the 55 pluses are 5% creators and only 26% spectators and 70% inactives. Now, this stuff is changing over time, but the first question to ask as you reach out to any group, whether they're donors or homeless people, is what level of participation do they have, and the age that they are is going to be the best predictor of that. Now, because we collect so much data at Forrester, I can give you details on some other groups. For example, here are people who have more than $1 million in investable assets, a little group we call donors. And if you look, donors participate at a below average rate, but not way below average. So you got 39% spectators, you got 9% creators, 10% joiners. So if you were trying to create something to reach out to this group, it would be reasonable to use social technologies because you'd be able to hit almost half of them through the spectator end, but you'd want to create it in such a way that they didn't have to do so much work creating the content. You'd want to create an application where they were where you created a lot of the content and they were sort of sharing around that. Also, this may not be the best group to reach out to through social networks like Facebook or LinkedIn because of the fact that only 10% of them appear to be in that category. You might also be interested in volunteers. So we looked at people who said that they volunteer regularly, and as you can see, they have a higher than average level of participation. The men participating, at least in the spectator area, is a little bit more than the women. I don't know why that is, but that's what the data tells us. But this means that if you wanted to create an application designed for volunteers, you sort of have the green light to go ahead and do this. And I think that would probably be a very positive thing to do, to take the people who are working with your organization and actually link them together around the causes that you're aiming at. Finally, if you're interested in helping people of lower income, we looked at people who make less than $25,000 a year. And as you can see, they participate at an above average rate, especially in the joiners category. So why do you think people with lower incomes are more likely to be participating?
It's probably age-related.
That's exactly right. People who make less than $25,000 a year, most of them are younger people, so that's what you see here. So enough with the people now. Let's talk about the objectives, the second group. And it turns out that as we looked in Groundswell at dozens and dozens of social applications, that they could be matched according to their objectives to typical roles within an organization. So for example, you may have a research group. In the Groundswell, you can actually listen to what people are saying about an issue or about your organization. Listening is different from ordinary research in that it actually taps into what people are talking about most. You have a marketing group. In the Groundswell, you can actually talk to people. The difference is here that you can actually hear their response when you talk. It's not just outbound communication. You may have a sales organization. In the Groundswell, you find the people who are most excited and have them sell your ideas on your behalf. You may be interested in helping to support people. In the Groundswell, you can actually create applications where they support one another. And finally, if you're interested in developing new products, development means something a little different in the book than it does, I know, for nonprofits, where development refers to fundraising. But when I talk about development, I'm talking about actually collaborating with your own stakeholders on what direction you should go, and we see in the Groundswell you can sort of embrace their ideas. So what I'm going to show you for the rest of this talk is actually some examples of how people do these things using the Groundswell. What can you accomplish? And I'm going to start with listening, learning from what your customers are saying. Notice that the arrows go back in the other direction here. So let me show you an example of listening. This is Lynn Perry. Lynn Perry is a Harley-riding guy from Waco, Texas. He also happens to be a cancer patient. He has 3 forms of cancer. He has bone cancer, prostate cancer, and cancer of the epiglottis. And he became of interest because of the fact that these National Comprehensive Cancer Centers, a group of cancer treatment centers, which includes Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City and MD Anderson, they became interested in how do cancer patients make decisions about where to get treated for cancer. So when they do marketing at these cancer centers, they've always gone on the assumption that what's most important is their reputation. So, for example, MD Anderson just bought a $125 million proton therapy center, and they can treat any form of cancer that can be treated. But when you talk to a guy like Lynn Perry, his idea of what's going on inside the cancer center is a little different. This is what he told me. He said they give you this little document. They're very insistent on patient promptness. I sit there and wait an hour and a half, 2 hours. There's something wrong with this picture. My time is more precious than theirs. So Lynn Perry's idea of the brand of MD Anderson is they make me wait. And when you realize, as he told me, that his cancer is terminal, you recognize that perhaps his time is more precious than theirs. So if there were only some way for the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, for these cancer centers to actually get in touch with what was important to the patients this way, they might change the way they do things. Well, it turns out that MD Anderson, Memorial Sloan Kettering, and these other cancer centers were able to do that. They created this, which they created in conjunction with Communispace. Communispace is a company that makes private communities. They recruited 350 cancer patients into this community, and then they started talking to them about cancer treatment. One of the first things that they did was to ask, by the way, this is blurred because for confidentiality reasons, but one of the first things they did in here was to ask the question, how did you decide where to get treated? And they expected to get the answer, we decided where to get treated based on the reputation of the cancer center. Well, it turns out that it's a very emotional decision when you've just been diagnosed with cancer, and people tend to go to somebody they trust, like their primary care physician, who they've been going to for 30 years to make the decision. Now the National Comprehensive Cancer Network members say, geez, we may have been concentrating on the wrong thing, and they are now changing the way they do marketing to actually go out to primary care physicians, because they recognize that this is an important way that people make those choices. They're also able to learn from people like Lynn Perry, who I've met up with because he's in this community, about things like why it's a challenge when patients have to wait, and they are making changes in the way that they schedule things as a result of the learning that comes from a community like this. This is the safest thing you can do with social technologies, is to listen, and as I think Frank would tell you, it's a pretty productive thing to do to learn about it, but once you start listening, you become convinced that perhaps you ought to be participating. So let's go on to the second piece of participating, and that's talking. Now, talking means two-way conversation, not just shouting. We're used to people advertising and saying, hey, we're great, we're great. But in fact, what happens here is that you not only talk, you listen to the messages that come back, and you also see whether those messages are getting carried along. And in order to explain this, let's talk about tampons. What, you don't want to talk about tampons? Well, just imagine for a moment that you were in charge of marketing for the Feminine Care Products division of Procter & Gamble, because you're trying to get people to understand that you have this product that may be useful to them. But if you don't want to talk about tampons, believe me, 13-year-old girls really don't want to talk about them. So they had to find a way to actually make these customers, these young girls, become aware of their product, but they couldn't just talk about it the way that you normally would in an advertisement. And that's why they created this. This is a community called BeingGirl.com. BeingGirl.com is not about tampons, because, of course, who would come to a community about that? This is a community about the problems of being a 13-year-old girl. So if you're in here, you can talk to other people about clothes, you can talk about cliques, you can talk about the problems you have with your mom, about school. It's mostly about the problem of who you are. But there is a space in here, and they're not trying to fool anybody. It's who the sponsor is clearly mentioned, and there's a space in here for health questions where you can ask a psychologist health questions. And like this is it normal to have cramps this bad? I will spare you reading the actual content. But if you look at the bottom, it says, good luck, Iris, for BeingGirl.com, brought to you by Always Pads and Panty Liners and Tampax tampons. Just a very subtle way to get that message across that there is help here. And it's also possible, of course, to get free samples on this site. So what they've done is by creating a community where people can talk about their own problems, they're able to get out the message that they have a product. And in fact, in talking to Procter & Gamble, they told me that per dollar spent, this is 4 times as effective as advertising. I don't know how they measure the effectiveness. They wouldn't share that, but I suspect it's through the number of samples that get generated. And it's been sufficiently successful for them that it's now been translated and is available in 21 other countries, including Saudi Arabia. So this is a creative way to do some talking. Let me show you another example that comes directly from the nonprofit business. I have my notes here. This is an application that was designed to create awareness for the problems that were happening in Burma. And it's called Fanista. There are a number of things here. They had a Facebook page to generate interest. They also had a 50 videos, one that appeared each day for 50 days. They had some celebrities helping them out. You can see them here. So they basically created a site to communicate this message, but the difference between this and a traditional marketing campaign is that you can share it. You can actually take these YouTube videos and embed them in your own blog. So they created a message that could be spread more easily. Over 1 million people have seen the YouTube videos that are involved in here, and they have tens of thousands of people who became fans of their Facebook page. So this is just a more creative way to get this message out, and also because of the fact that you can comment on the videos for people to actually contribute in their own way. Excuse me. Let's talk about the third objective, energizing. This is helping the people who like you best to actually recruit other people. And to show you an example of this, let's talk about chocolate now, which is probably more interesting to talk about than tampons. Here's an example that comes from Hershey's. Hershey's actually was interested in getting as many people as possible to learn about a new kind of chocolate that they developed, very rich chocolate they called Hershey's Bliss. And while they did some traditional advertising, they also decided to do parties. They worked with this organization called House Party to do 10,000 parties throughout the country. So if you signed up to run one of these parties, you invited people. That invitations all went through the websites. They came to your house. The Hershey company, the House Party company, would send you some of this chocolate to try out, along with some sort of party favors. And you could have the party, and then when you were done, you could actually upload photos and videos from the party. So through these 10,000 parties, they were actually able to reach 130,000 people. They measured before and after here. The people before mostly said, we haven't ever heard of this chocolate. Afterwards, over 90% of them said not only that they would like it, but that they would recommend it to a friend. And they had 7 million people actually come to this website and get a look at some of these pictures. And they're very convincing. This company actually won the Groundswell Award in the energizing category last year. And the reason partly is because it's so persuasive. You look at videos of a 2-year-old with chocolate all over his face talking about Hershey's Bliss, and you just can't help but want to try this out. So they've actually taken customers that love their product and energized them. Here's another energizing application, which I think you're going to hear more about later today. I'm not going to say too much about what the Obama administration did, except to tell you that through over 1 million people on their website and through over 1 million people on Facebook, they were able to take the people who supported them most and energize them to get the message out. And when you consider how narrowly balanced this country is between Democrats and Republicans, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that Obama won the election because of the activity that went on in these social networks. All right, let me talk about supporting applications. This is finding a way to enable your customers to support each other. And this can not only be helpful to them, but it can also save money because it means that you can take the resources you use for support and deploy them a little bit more effectively. Here's a good example of this, and I put this up here because it shows some of the creativity you can have with business models. So this is the Inspire community. This particular element of it is about lung cancer. There's also Inspire communities around a whole bunch of other diseases. It's what you'd expect from a health community. You can go in here and ask questions and get help from people about this. In this case, it's for people who have lung cancer. But the thing that amazed me here is the way this works. So if you are an organization for people who have a health problem, you can go to Inspire and say, I'd like you to set up a community for me. And they say, okay, we'll be happy to do that, and they don't charge you anything. So now your members are getting help. Not only that, there are no advertisements on here. And Inspire is not doing this just for fun. They are not a nonprofit organization. So how can they possibly survive giving these communities away for free to nonprofit organizations and not putting any ads on? Well, it turns out that every once in a while a pharmaceutical company will come along and say, you know, we need people in clinical trials. We're trying to find people who have had lung cancer for more than 2 years and did not respond to such and such kind of therapy. And of course, there's no mailing list of people like that available anywhere. So every once in a while, you just see a message on here that says, hey, this company's looking for clinical trials. They're looking for people that have these qualities. If you're interested, we'd like to connect you up. Well, it turns out that because of the difficulty of finding people like this, the pharmaceutical companies are willing to pay $3,000 for each person that they find that fits those criteria. And that is the economic support for this. Just a very creative way to actually be successful in a nonprofit environment. I just wanted to show you this, which I think is the most surprising social network I've ever seen. This is homelessnation.org. It's a social network for homeless people. Now, this shows that some things are possible even if you don't follow my framework. When I first heard about this, I connected up with the guy and I said, homeless people, you know, if you look at the post process, the homeless people use the internet? And I found out what I didn't know, which is that when they go to shelters and other places where they collect, that yes, indeed, they do get internet access. Not only that, they have a challenge. They do form social connections with one another, but it's difficult to keep track because, you know, they don't have cell phones. They are able to actually use this to keep track of and connect with one another, and it's been very effective. This is actually started in Canada. They have chapters now in different places. But, for example, they told me about one situation in which some people were trying to find a family member who had gone missing and was homeless. So they put a message up here and said, has anybody seen Fred? We're really trying to locate him. And another homeless person was on here, saw the message, and said, oh, I know where he is. You know, he's on the other side of town. Let me connect you up. And they actually were able to connect him up with his family through that. Now, this is supported actually by volunteer contributions. But one of the things I want to point out here is that in many cases, there are companies who are willing to contribute to helping you to actually get started here. They may contribute bandwidth. They may actually contribute technical expertise. But it is possible to get people to help out and to get corporate sponsorship for some of these social activities. Okay, let me talk about the last piece, involving your own stakeholders in your product development. And here I'd like to show you an example from the Brooklyn Museum, which won in the nonprofit category last year. So the Brooklyn Museum is a small museum in New York, but they actually have done some amazing things using social media. For example, this is their ArtShare Facebook page. You can go in there and choose any of the pieces of art that you're interested in and actually feature them on your own Facebook page. They had more than 3,000 people participate in this. Second thing they did here was a crowd-curated exhibit. They had 2,000 people go in here and pick the things that they most wanted to see displayed out of the collection that the museum had. And the museum actually ended up featuring those. There was over 20,000 votes that were cast, and I ended up featuring what the crowd had selected in an exhibit that they did. And there's also a very interesting thing that they did called tagging. You can go in here and look at any of the things in here and tag it with your own identification. So you might want to say Renaissance, or you might want to say this is a nude, or you might want to say dreamy, And as a result of this, you can actually look at these different tags and find pieces of art that not according to how the museum classifies them, but according to actually how people like you are classifying them. You can bet that this has also created a certain loyalty among the museum goers toward this museum because they're involving people in the museums, the way the museum is run. So I said successful social applications start with clear objectives. That's the most important thing here, is to remember to start with what objective you want to accomplish. If I can summarize, the groundswell can be threatening. Remember what happened to Motrin. But you can turn it to your advantage. It's much better to participate. You want to analyze your people and objectives first, and then go on to strategy, and finally think about technology last, not first. And it's possible to do a number of objectives: listening, talking, energizing, supporting, or embracing. But it's best if you pick one and concentrate on it. That's the best way to succeed. Thank you very much. Now, a couple of things here. That's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. Feel free to email me. And then at this website, as I said, we've got data on consumers, and also we've got the application for the Forrester Groundswell Awards.
And I think we have some questions from the audience and probably online as well.
Okay, I'll be happy to take questions. Go ahead.
My question is, in terms of those websites that you showed, the tampons, the chocolate, they're all great, but how are people actually finding them? Are they using alternative marketing strategies, like in print, in other mediums, to drive people to those websites? Or in general, how are people actually finding out about them?
Yeah, it is necessary to market these applications somehow. And there are a lot of different strategies. In the case of the BeingGirl.com community, they already at Procter & Gamble had a series of materials that were being used in health classes, hygiene classes. So they ended up putting that website on there. Now, I want to be clear, just because a website is on the materials doesn't mean it's going to stick. But this enabled a bunch of girls to say, hey, what's that? Go look at it, try it out, and say, oh, this is actually interesting to me. You certainly can do traditional advertising. It's also possible to go out to mailing lists that you may have and tell people that something has been made available. But one of the most important things is to start with some sort of a core group that might be interested. Say invite 10 or 20 or 30 people to participate and actually create the thing, and then tell them to go out to their own networks and spread it. And by doing that, it could take a little longer, but you can see incredible growth sort of happening organically. Of course, this all depends on the fact that you have to start with something that's actually interesting to do. BeingGirl.com wouldn't be successful except that it's actually enjoyable for girls to participate in. And you're going to have to be thinking, what are my stakeholders' problems, whether they're my donors or the people I'm trying to help out, and try and create an application or an environment that is interesting enough to them that they're more likely to spread it in a viral way.
We have a question from online.
I'm going to take an online question.
Yeah. So everyone can hear it. A couple of online questions. We've got one from Mark Goodman. He said he noticed the 17 to 24 demo is not represented on the online activity, and he was interested if any of that information was available.
Yes, actually, if you go on the website, I only showed certain groups there, but the 18 to 24s, we don't go down to 17, but the 18 to 24s are on our website, and just as you might imagine, 18 to 24s participate even more than 25 to 34. So if you're trying to reach anybody in that category, I'd go so far as to say, if you're not using social technology, then you're going to miss them. That's where they spend their time.
I have another one from Allison Parker. She says, in reference to the slide categorized by age again, my nonprofit organization focuses on 55 and over demographic. The percentage of inactives in social media, do you have any suggestions on how to reach this demographic through social media?
Okay, yeah, I'll talk about that. As I said, we have some new data coming out, and one of the most notable trends in the new data is that the 55 and ups and the 65 and ups are starting to participate more. So it's no longer quite as hopeless to reach that group. You definitely want to create applications that are easy to use and don't require customer contributions or participant contributions. to be successful, because if you create an environment like that and expect people to contribute a lot, you'll probably have a rough time getting it going. The other thing to recognize as you go out to groups, to that age group, is that you're going to miss a lot of people. So even when we get up to the point where there's 25 or 30% participation among people 55 and older, that just tells you that there's a lot of people who are just not going to be doing this. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it does tell you that if you put all of your energy into an online social technology strategy for that age group, you're probably not investing your funds most wisely. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Josh. Thanks so much for your time, first of all. Second of all, I have a question about measurement. We at our nonprofit have been using Twitter, social media strategies for about 6 months. And in order to convince my boss to continue letting me contribute time to it, I was wondering if, it was expensive to actually measure these abilities, these capabilities that we've been doing, and if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'd say it's expensive not to measure it. Because what happens then is you put this energy in, and then at some point, what happens is, I've heard stories like yours many times, where people say, we got this thing started, it seems to be going, and then my boss wants to know what we're getting out of it. What you measure depends on your objective. That's part of the reason to start with objectives. For example, if your objective is talking and you're trying to generate awareness, then you'd want to see how many people you have reached, and probably do some surveys of people on the site to say, were you aware of this before, and have your attitudes changed? If you have a supporting objective, then you're generally in a position where you want to actually demonstrate that the people involved in it have been helped. So you could look at how many people have been helped. You also can look at the amount of time you spend doing support activities personally, and whether you maybe could point out that you saved money. In the book where I talk about the Dell Community Support Forum, where people answer each other's questions about Dell computers, they actually measure how many support calls have been avoided by the fact that people get answers in there and don't have to call the company. And at $10 a support call, that adds up to real money. The key is to build these little hooks in. For example, if you have a YouTube video, you could have a great YouTube video that people love. If you forgot to put the little URL at the end of it, then you can say, oh, well, 500,000 people saw this YouTube video. Then what? Don't know. Put a URL at the end of it. Some of those people will go on and actually do something on your website, and you can track that. So the key is to actually build these things in. As far as Twitter goes, in terms of measurement, I think it's mostly going to be successful through driving people to other channels. A lot of the Twitter communication involves links. So it's great to say, well, hey, we've got 1,700 followers. But it's much better to be able to say, because of what we did with Twitter, 4,000 people went to this website, and the people who went there, 20% of them actually became donors. All right, now we actually have economics to associate with it. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, Josh, we have time for one more question. This one comes from Jody Harper from New Hampshire. And you kind of covered this, but she has some questions on if you have any other ideas for starting to develop objectives for a new media campaign for someone who's brand new.
I wouldn't start with a new media campaign. I would start with the organization. Now, the main difference between corporations and nonprofits, as I work with them around social technologies, is the corporations have customers. So for them, it's simple. They almost always want to talk about some sort of social activity among their customers. But if you're a nonprofit, you need to think, what's most important for us right now? Is it spreading awareness in the general population? Is it getting donors and getting them more excited? Is it getting volunteers? These are all possible objectives, but I'd start with what's the most critical need for your organization, and then look at whether social technologies can actually help you to advance toward that goal. And by doing that, you're more likely to come up with something that the management of the organization comes back and says, oh, this is really helping us, as opposed to, wow, you got everybody talking, but our problem right now is that we need to raise funds through donors. All right, so this is, we're done now?
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jen.